Thank you again for joining us for the Cross-Border Digital Policies for Africa. I'm Tracy Sinkamba-Fosta. I'm the International Project and Research Management Coordinator here at the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. We will be starting this meeting shortly, and I shared earlier some housekeeping points, which I will show you one more time. We will have a range of excellent speakers today. And in order to keep the background noise to a minimum, we are asking that you mute your microphones when you are not speaking. And we will also be muting participants in case you do forget this. But we do encourage you to turn on your cameras. So please go ahead and turn on your cameras so that we can see you. As a reminder, this event is being conducted in English, and we'll have some French interpretation. Please go ahead and select the language in the interpretation icon below. For speakers, please do speak slowly so that it'll be easier for our interpreters to interpret. Well, without further ado, I will now turn, it's 14:04, so 2:04 over here. I will now turn to our official welcome and opening remarks from our esteemed speakers. And first up, we have Mr. Bertrand de la Chapelle, who is the Executive Director for the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. Over to you, Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I'm extremely happy to welcome everyone here to this kickoff event for the Cross-Border Digital Policies for Africa project. And in that regard, I want to first thank very deeply GIZ for enabling this very important initiative, but also I would say for the great interactions in the time that we spent preparing it in close relationship. I'm also happy to welcome Moses Bayingana, and we are very much looking forward to the interactions with the African Union. I must say that we are inspired in that regard by the great relations we had with UNECLAC in a previous effort that we did in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is a 2-year project. And in the next 2 years, we will see the organization of several events. This will enable an ongoing dialogue with a large number of stakeholders from the continent. The goal is also to develop a dedicated status report on cross-border digital policies for Africa. And last but not least, ultimately, to enable knowledge sharing in the form of learning modules. In that context, the role of Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network is to, I would say, serve as the connective tissue and the facilitator to bridge the silos, to collect information, to synthesize the relevant knowledge across the different countries and participants in Africa. And in addition, I would say I'm very happy to note that there are complementarities and synergies that can be developed with a Datasphere initiative that we are currently incubating within INJ, and that explores new approaches to data governance to unlock the value of data for all. This exercise about Africa, and also what I mentioned on the Datasphere Initiative, is about how we collectively define the digital society we want. And it's a digital society that maximizes, at the same time, the social and the economic value that is being created, and makes sure that it is distributed as equitably as possible with the full participation of all actors in defining the goal and where we want to go. So without further ado, I'm really looking forward to our common journey in the coming 2 years. And I will just now let the partners and the people who will run this project to introduce this initiative and its different aspects. It's really great to have you all, and I'm looking forward to the work together.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bertrand. Thank you for setting the scene. I now would like to turn over to Mr. Moses Bayingana, who's the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission. Over to you, Moses. Moses, I think you have to unmute.
You're muted.
Sorry for that. I guess you can hear me now.
We do.
Yes, greetings to everyone. And thank you for inviting me. So I will proceed with my remarks. Esteemed organizers of today's event, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be with you at this meeting on cross-border digital policy. As the world grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, digital technologies are at the forefront in supporting efforts to combat the virus and ensure business continuity. Furthermore, in this unparalleled moment, the power of digital technology cannot be underrated, and we are all working to ensure that technology is harnessed for good and ensure that it is inclusive and safe. Despite the challenges related to the pandemic, at the African Union, we have been developing breakthrough policies and forward-looking continental digital strategies and frameworks in line with the global best practices. I'll mention just a few. The Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa that was adopted last year that will guide us and be our digital agenda for the next decade. More recently, the development of the AU Interoperability Framework for Digital ID, which sets a vision that all people in Africa can easily and securely access the services they need when they need them from both public and private sector providers, which will encourage inclusive and meaningful participation in the wider digital economy and society and allow services to operate with greater trust and certainty. The framework further proposes to define at the continental level a harmonized approach for individuals to share digital identity claims issued by trusted authorities with service providers in order to prove their legal identity in an online and offline environment. We have also recently developed the Continental Data Policy Framework, which sets out a common vision, principles, strategic priorities, and key recommendations and action to guide countries in developing their national data systems and capabilities to effectively derive value from data. Furthermore, the Data Policy Framework aims to optimize cross-border data flows, strengthen and harmonize data governance in Africa, and create a shared data space and standards that regulate the intensifying production and use of data across the continent, while acknowledging disparities among countries on data maturity and emphasizing the need for mitigating risks and placing the well-being of African citizens at the center of this data policy. Considering that all the above are indeed cross-border digital strategies and frameworks, as the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network launches these projects on cross-border digital policies, I look forward to the establishment of synergies with the GIZ-supported Datasphere program that is already working with the AU on both the digital ID and data policy frameworks. I wish you a successful launch and delivery of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks, Moses, and sharing your perspectives from the AUC. To share his experience of the development process for Latin American Region Report, I welcome Mr. Edwin Fernando Rojas Mejia, who's the Senior Economic Assistant at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations, UN-ECLAC. He's also better known as Fernando. Over to you, Fernando.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Internet and Jurisdiction for the invitation to participate in this important event. It is a pleasure to be here and to be able to share with you some of the work that we have been developing with INJ for quite some time now. In this regard, we've launched a regional report that analyzes similar issues of those that are proposed in this project for Africa. And because of that report, we obtain very interesting information which we consider to be very useful to support the development of public policies to foster the digital economy in Latin America. ECLAC is the technical secretariat of a ministerial forum called ILAC, which has been in operation for about 15 years now. In this forum, ECLAC, in coordination with government representatives, academia, industry, the technical community, and some multilateral organizations, prepares a regional digital agenda, prioritizing issues related to the digital development of Latin America. We are currently working on the implementation of the 2022 digital agenda. And one of the most important initiatives that we are promoting is the digital regional market that aims to strengthen the digital integration of Latin America and take advantage of the geographical proximity and similar interests of our countries. In this context, the topics that were included in the regional report elaborated with INJ, such as cross-border data transfer, regional regulatory harmonization, privacy, data security, are of the most importance, since through regulatory harmonization and coordinated work in those mentioned matters, this regional digital market would be strengthened. Some findings that I would like to highlight from the report refer, for example, to the fact that most of the experts that were interviewed believe that the cross-border legal challenges posed by the internet constitute a barrier for small and medium-sized enterprises in the region. In this regard, they also mentioned that these companies face several challenges as they seek to expand, including different regulations and standards, inconsistency in tax policies, and excessive administrative burdens. On the other hand, the experts also highlighted that the uncoordinated action of a wide range of actors and initiatives can hinder the digitization processes. In this sense, close to 70% of those interviewed agree or strongly agree that there is a need for coordination to address cross-border legal challenges. I also want to mention that the methodology developed by INJ and applied in the process of gathering information for the elaboration of the regional report was very useful, since in addition to allowing us to know firsthand the opinion of experts on the issues that were included in the report, it also served to reinforce and expand our links and networks, which is already a positive result itself. Finally, I would like to thank INJ for the work carried out and express our interest in continuing to collaborate with them to support the digital development of our countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fernando, for sharing your experience on the need for addressing cross-border digital policies in Latin America. And I just wanted to also say that we have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Clemens Kepler, Senior Policy Officer in the Digital Technologies Division at the German Ministry. Over to you, Clemens.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished contributors, it is with great honor that we are kicking off this endeavor today to address and to research cross-border digital policies in Africa through the development of regional status report that frames, maps, and addresses these issues. We understand that the development and harmonization of digital policies is an important priority to the African Union and many members of it. The German government is delighted to support this important effort to work towards closing digital gaps in order to strengthen the digital and the economic integration in the region as well as globally. We applaud the African Union Commission in its ongoing work on a continental data policy framework, which will establish a common basis for member states to develop national data policies and regulations. The Federal German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development has prioritized projects for digital development significantly in recent years. In Africa, we're currently commissioning almost 300 projects with digital components, both in our bilateral portfolio, as well as on the regional level with strong partners such as the African Union Commission or Smart Africa. There is a need for more coherence in policies for the construction of an integrated regional digital ecosystem, not only during the pandemic, but beyond. Better coordination and coherence are essential in order to make the digital transformation inclusive and sustainable, so that nobody is left behind. Therefore, I am very glad this first regional status report in the African Union will provide an evidence-based overview about facts, trends, and challenges for the digital transformation of economies, governments, and societies in Africa. Hence, it sets the basis for a better understanding of the fast-paced developments of internet-related activities in the region and for further action and decision-making. We are looking forward to learn about the first results from the report at the Global Internet Governance Forum in 2022, which will be hosted in Addis Ababa for the first time in history and for the second time in Africa ever. A unique opportunity to showcase the outstanding digital developments in Africa to the world. We are convinced that the coordinated action in the digital realm is key to the success of an interconnected and dependent world. It is therefore one of our aims to foster international cooperation and dialogue on such topics, for which we are here today. This is why I am pleased to having established a trusted cooperation with the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Framework when we funded the first Internet Jurisdiction Global Status Report in Latin America and the Caribbean last year. The finding of these reports constitute the base for many following discussions and can be used for continued capacity development of all stakeholders. In addition to greater coherence and coordination, we agree that increased investment in the digital market could help to overcome the economic and social consequences that economies all over the world are suffering from as a result of the pandemic. It could also be an opportunity to generate jobs and foster inclusion as well as gender equality. In other words, the importance of the alignment of a legal framework regarding Internet and jurisdiction policies lies in two main points, which are strongly related to each other. On the one hand, strengthening a unified and inclusive digital transformation through adequate legal and institutional frameworks in the region can help to better overcome the pandemic in a sense of guaranteeing the ability to work, educate, access to health services and information. On the other hand, the opportunity to generate jobs through further digitalization and working towards a digital common market can turn the sector into a boost that helps the region economically. The pandemic has painfully shown us how interconnected we truly are. Just like the regulation of the internet, uncoordinated action can have adverse effects on others. Cooperation is therefore the key to mutual beneficial development. Germany is and will continue to be a reliable partner to aim for that goal. We wish you a fruitful discussion today and great success with your research in the upcoming months. And we are looking forward to discuss the next first results of the report next year in Addis with you and hopefully in person. Thank you and take care and stay healthy.
Thank you very much, Clemens, for your opening remarks. Thank you to Bertrand aussi, Moses, Fernando, and for setting the scene for today's kickoff event. Before we move on to our next panel discussion, we would like to show you a brief video to introduce you to INJ's project process, which will address cross-border digital policies for Africa.
Digital technologies have the potential to drive economic growth and job creation across sectors and support global and regional interconnection. By implementing cross-border digital policies that harness the opportunities these technologies have to offer, African countries can improve well-being and sustainable development across the continent. To achieve this, policymakers need to better understand the cross-border dimensions of digital policy approaches and their effects, both direct and indirect. Our digital society has increasingly complex interdependencies, so ensuring evidence-based policy innovation and meaningful multi-stakeholder cooperation is fundamental. Since 2012, the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, I&JPN, has been at the forefront of meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement of regional voices, and including African perspectives is now more important than ever. This is why I&JPN, with support from GIZ, is launching a 2-year project that will leverage existing networks of actors across the continent to frame, map, and address cross-border digital policy issues across Africa. Stakeholders from the continent have a vital part to play in addressing cross-border digital policies with a shared voice, for Africans, by Africans. Over 2 years, the project will have 3 phases. 1. Knowledge dialogue and consultations. 2. A dedicated status report that will map and showcase legal and technical approaches to cross-border digital policies in Africa. 3. Outreach and learning modules. Knowledge dialogue and consultations. There will be 2 knowledge dialogue and consultation workshops with African experts to support knowledge exchange within and across countries. These recurring workshops will allow to share knowledge, be acknowledged among peers, promote interaction with international stakeholders, and crowdsource priorities for the content of the status report. Status report on cross-border digital policy in Africa. Next, we will develop the first status report on legal and technical approaches to cross-border digital policies in Africa. This will be done through continent-wide data collection, including interviews and in-depth analysis of existing knowledge. It will serve as a valuable baseline for progress in the region and beyond, and represent the amplified and shared perspective of African digital policy practitioners. Outreach and learning modules. The key findings of the report will inform capacity-building workshops, learning modules, and the basis of the findings of the knowledge dialogue and status report, tailor-made for African policymakers. By connecting African experts to co-create the pioneering status report on cross-border digital policy, we aim to provide a complementary platform for Africans to reframe and also broaden the international policy debate on data and cross-border data flows. Join us and be part of a conversation on digital cross-border policy that aims to amplify on the interests of over 1 billion people on the African continent. 1. Express your interest to contribute to the report and/or be part of the knowledge dialogue workshops to help shape the content of the status report. By doing so, you will also join our global knowledge network of hundreds of practitioners and data contributors. 2. Partner with us to share updates of this process and engagement opportunities with your networks. 3. Learn more www.internetjurisdiction.net/Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will just be sharing my screen again. And just to highlight a few of the main points from the video, which will be made available to you following today's session. And if there were any connectivity issues, you will have the link to the video as well. So why are we doing this? Well, following the successful publishing of I&J's Global Status Report in 2019 and a regional status report for Latin America, which Fernando just shared with you, and one of the key outcomes from an I&J conference with African stakeholders that was held in 2020 was to establish a regional status report for Africa. What do we aim to achieve? Well, as shown in the video, there are 3 phases in this timeline. Phase 1 incorporates 2 phases, which you can see here, whereby we are commencing with knowledge dialogues and consultations. After today's kickoff, the objectives of the workshops are going to be to establish a recurring and safe space for practitioners and stakeholders from Africa, to collect and frame the most relevant questions, to share expertise, to support peer-to-peer learning, to consult on upcoming trends and issues, and to amplify African perspectives towards stakeholders in the global north. Following these phases, you will see the development of a status report, and finally, the development of learning modules, which will come in 2022. How can you contribute to the process? An engagement survey will appear in the chat box and will also be shared with you at the end of the day. Please complete it and send it back to us at www.internetjurisdiction.net/Africa. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to I&J's Director of Operations and Knowledge Partnerships, Mr. Martin Hullen, who will moderate this session with our esteemed panelists. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and welcome again to everybody today that is joining us. It really is a great pleasure to see you here and to also see come to fruition what was a long process of preparing this initiative after we've heard a lot of feedback after our regional conference back in May last year that we co-organized with the African Union, where there was real appetite and a real request to see how we could amplify not only the very valuable perspectives of African stakeholders, but how to also make sure that the interface with the ongoing global dialogue on internet governance, but also data governance questions, how this interface can be created. So before I move ahead and will introduce you to our individual speakers, about which we are also very thrilled so that they can share their perspective on the project and on the ongoing work with us, we would like to actually open up a little interim poll with all of the participants here. In order for this to work, a browser needs to be opened. So we would like to ask you the question, what policy solutions you believe need to be developed to enable the digital transformation strategy for Africa. In order to give us an answer that we can then show on the screen, we only need to go to www.menti.com, and without creating an account, you just have to type in these 6 numbers, 66, 21, and 69. And once the first answers come floating in, we will share a rolling overview of this feedback, and this will also, I think, set the stage quite well for the other different perspectives also that our esteemed panelists will then share with us over the course of the next few minutes. So I think we'll leave the poll open for another minute. So don't be shy. Feel free to feed something in. And it also is an example of the type of engagement and data collection that will take place over the course of the next few months, because we really want to make sure that this exercise is a community-driven exercise and that the topics that will be covered by the report and by the learning modules in the future are very much something that is a result of this ongoing dialogue of African stakeholders, where we can make sure that we don't have any major gaps and that it is something extremely relevant from a practitioner's point of view. So that being said, I see the first answers are already floating in. Thank you so much for testing this out together with us. And maybe, Frane, you can already start showing some of the first answers that are coming in. so that we can see here. So the first things that already started coming in are questions of accessibility. Free data flow is a recurring theme also generally in our work. Of course, reference to high-level political alliances like Smart Africa, the establishment of trusted mechanisms where the safe space that we hope those intersessional meetings will also provide can help, public participation, and a also very balanced stakeholder engagement in a multi-stakeholder fashion very much resonates also with what we hope can be accomplished with the initiative, the enabling of a regulatory environment, and of course, capacity development of specific enforcement authorities and gender promotion. So you see already here, based on quick 29 submissions that we got over the course of the last minute or so, you see the diverse range of perspectives that already are being shared when we ask a question regarding key policy solutions that also have a cross-border policy dimension. And in order to now further complement this, it is my great pleasure to welcome now to the virtual kind of podium Onika Makwawa, who is joining us today from the Alliance for Affordable Internet, where she's the head of Africa. And Onika, as you have the pleasure, but I guess also the difficult responsibility of being the first speaker now reacting to what we just saw on the screen, I would be very interested to hear from you what you believe the key areas would be where cross-border digital policy solutions need to be developed in order to enable a really inclusive digital transformation strategy for Africa. So Onika, you have the floor, and I'm very much looking forward to your response.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this really important process. So my comments are going to really focus more on the need for us to ensure that we are also investing in some of the demand side issues to, enable the uptake of this transformed digital developed Africa that we are all envisioning. We are still a long ways from realizing universal access for all. Yet our digital development progresses and the inequalities that go with it seem to threaten the vision that Africa has for its digital transformation as a benefit for the majority of the citizens. At this point, majority of Africans are still very much offline. Sub-regional bodies such as ECOWAS have actually modeled regional collaboration on universal service laws, for example, that could offer a starting point for broader collaboration in other areas of digital development. It's really important that this issue of access and making sure that we are inclusive in this development is addressed before we go too further along the development. Most importantly, we need greater collaboration across the continent to ensure that digitalization does not erode existing human and consumer rights frameworks that currently exist. As Africa's digital transformation strategy unfolds, with the hopes of vibrant digital economies, we must invest in enhancing cross-border digital policy and regulatory frameworks that center the protection of consumer rights across the continent and globally. The tendency has been to regulate for the sector and for the economy, for the markets, and has tended to ignore the importance of also regulating for consumer protection. The existing trust deficit between civil society and public sector, as well as private sector, can be rebuilt through a balanced regulatory environment that protects the sector while also advancing digital consumer protection. And this will really slow down some of the resistance that we are seeing towards digitization, including uptake of digital IDs. In the past decade, consumer rights organizations have actually advocated for the development of preserving their offline consumer rights online as well. And it's really important that we begin to pay attention to this need for well-developed digital consumer rights. And I'm just going to give you just a quick example of the 8 basic consumer rights, the rights to basic needs. This is really where we need to begin to frame affordability and affordable and meaningful access as a basic right for citizens across the continent. The right to safety and security. At the moment, online safety, and I'm speaking more specifically to gender-based violence online, is a major challenge that we have not really developed solutions to actually address, and it actually contributes towards the digital gender gap in the region and globally. And this really comes to issues such as content moderation, and really looking at what is this cost of exclusion to our economies. A recent study that FYI published actually puts the cost of exclusion at over $1 trillion in about 32 small and middle income countries, majority of whom are in the region. So this exclusion of gender in digital development is actually costing us and the economies that we hope will build jobs as well. The right to choice is, we need to frame all the data protection issues that have been raised in the context of protecting consumers as well. I'm gonna skip the rights to redress, but it's fairly self-explanatory. Rights to information, pricing transparency, and including taxation. There needs to be greater transparency in pricing in the sector as well as taxation, especially those consumer-facing taxes. And so we need to really develop these further so that they actually speak to the existing consumer rights protections in all of the countries we're in, including the regional frameworks that we have. Right to education really goes to the issue of digital skills development and making sure that we are being inclusive. Right to presentation and the right to a healthy environment, and this is really around sustainable connectivity. The long-term carbon costs depend on the policy choices that we made today. So we need to begin to look at those both from an infrastructure point of view, but also from a device point of view. So policies such as the right to repair would actually go a long way towards making sure that regionally we are managing our e-waste along as well. And I will conclude by saying that not addressing some of these critical issues that face consumers actually are a threat to our vision of this digitized economy, because it does not include everyone. It's not an inclusive economy, but also it really threatens this notion of a common digital market, because we need consumers in that market as well. So we must regulate both for the sector and for the consumers to be protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anika. And a lot of very relevant points, and what really resonates is also to take one item out, the question of inclusiveness, and that also the demand side needs to be taken into account. And what I particularly was interested in, and also we hope that this project can play a role as kind of a connective tissue amongst different silos, is to reduce the trust deficit that you were explaining, because it really seems to be key in order to make sure that we share knowledge with each other and understand the greater picture that is there. So with this, I would now like to move ahead to our next esteemed speaker. This will be Monsieur Didier Kurikimfura, who is Director of Technology and Innovation at Smart Africa, which was referred to before. And in the case of Didier, I would like to ask a similar question again of what you believe the key challenges for cross-border digital policies in Africa would be, and in particular, how the perspective of Smart Africa is in regards to how to tackle them and what is currently being done in order so that we also can learn how this activity can dock onto this. So, Monsieur, you have the floor.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank again the organizers of this event, the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, for giving me the opportunity to participate to this key dialogue for the future of the African continent. And I'd like also to thank our key partners at Smart Africa, GIZ, as well as the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, who support this initiative. So cross-border digital policies are part of the DNA of Smart Africa. Our alliance, which was created in 2013, was born from the idea that if we join our effort, we can use ICT to accelerate the socio-economic development of the African continent. We are convinced that this cannot be done by government alone. Socio-economic development caused by digital technologies require a multi-stakeholder dialogue, and which include the private sector, developing and deploying technologies, and also the government in their role of regulators, and also the citizen who use technologies and are affected by this transformation. Our alliance, the Smart Africa Alliance, is therefore made of 32 African states, but also international organizations and various organizations representing the private sector. And our ultimate goal is to transform Africa into a single digital market by 2030, which requires to develop the right regulatory environment. So I just wanted to paint the picture, and before responding to the question, to say that harmonization for us is very important. While we want to build a single digital market, we also want to protect the capacities of member states, because each member state in Africa are sovereign and they have full autonomy and authority. So as we work in harmonizing, we always make sure at Smart Africa that we preserve the sovereignty of our different member states. And it can only be possible when, while maintaining the sovereignty, we also work on the right trust mechanism among ourselves to work together. And the reason why I would like to talk here on a challenge, the main challenge here, I think, is for us trust. Because let me give you a very simple example. Today, Smart Africa has 32 member states. And when you look at the whole continent, we're talking about over 50 member states. And as of today, 32 countries do have, for example, data protection laws. But out of these 32 countries, 9 do not have any data protection authorities to enforce the law. And when data protection authorities exist, they often lack also resources to fully exercise their mandate. So there are enormous gaps in the level of enforcement capacities between countries. Therefore, when countries do not trust each other and remain reluctant to authorize, for example, cross-border data transfers, it does happen even when there are legal framework in place. That's why Smart Africa, specifically on this, on the trust, creating trust mechanism, we work on legal and regulatory harmonization, but also we create trust and collaboration mechanisms. But we don't stop there. We also go beyond on building capacity for regulators. And for this purpose, we launched the Smart Africa Digital Academy together with GIZ, with through the funding with BMZ. It has helped to strengthen enforcement and collaboration capacities of regulators. So this is just an example I wanted to share with you about some of the challenges that we face, especially, and a very specific example of an area where we're focusing currently to create a trust environment. I'll probably expand a little bit later between countries to allow cross-border, for example, data transfers. And so we're focusing on creating the right trust mechanism. For those who don't know Smart Africa, it's chaired at the board, at the level of the board by President Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. And what is a bit unique about Smart Africa is that at the head of state are at the forefront of this digital transformation, sitting themselves at the board of this organization. So far, we're 32 countries, and it's representing more or less a market of 815 million people. So working together is crucial. Collaboration is crucial to address some of these issues, policies issues, which are cross-border in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didier. Those points are extremely appreciated, and also to pick out again a few things that resonate. I mean, there is this ambition of building a digital single market by 2030, which is no small ambition, and I think it links back also to the opening points made Fernando from CEPA, where there's also a similar pathway of a neighboring continent, where also the prerequisites and the best practices of getting there involve the question of policy harmonization and similar exercises as the one that we will try to initiate here as a complementary kind of connective initiative to exactly connect the dots. And also what was pretty poignant, I believe, is again the policy harmonization question, and what reminds us then also of the question of interoperability of policies when one needs to respect the sovereign status of the member states, different regions, different norms, different cultural backgrounds, and the question of harmonization and interoperability is certainly a topic that is then worth to further investigate in this regard. So thank you so much for your intervention, and we also look greatly forward to have Smart Africa actively engage in the coming steps. And with this, I would now move on then to our next esteemed. This would be, in this case, Mr. Thabo Mashiguane. Thabo is joining us because he's the chairman of the board of EFICTA. For those who are not familiar, EFICTA is the Africa Information Communication Technologies Alliance, which is a private sector-led alliance of ICT associations, multinational corporation companies, etc., representing the ICT sector. So Thabo, with this, I would like to give you the floor. And also, I would be very much interested in understanding your perspective on the linkage that exists between digital policy, regional integration, and development in Africa. So Thabo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Martin, much appreciated. We are so excited to be part of this invitation and this initiative that you actually have started. I would like to also extend my gratitude to your team in actually ushering us through this particular process. I want to actually believe that from a perspective of EFICTA, from what I'm listening very intently on everyone who has spoken, we are so very much aligned and so close. When I'm looking at my presentation, it's as if we shared information, which is very much something that is encouraging in me. And just to start in introducing EFICTA and to show that how very much aligned we are between ourselves in what we want to get to, our vision of ensuring that we fulfill the promise of the digital age for everyone in Africa speaks very much at the core of what we want to talk about. And we believe that benefits that are going to come from this type of an interaction, which is multi-stakeholder in design, and also to ensure that the advocacy and representation in putting down this policy is so inclusive. It's what lies at the core of our beliefs. And that is the reason why we are existing and having multi organizations being part of our membership across the whole of Africa. And to talk to the challenges, and also just to have the perspective of inter-regional and inter-country interactions to make this work. I think what we have to start with, the issue of common principles and also the frame of reference. Are we speaking from the same frame of reference? Very important that as countries, we start actually espousing to the common principles. I know we've got the SADCs of the world, and I believe that is some of the items of the organizations and institutions that we ought to leverage. Because when I look at the report that you have produced, you would actually see that a large proportion of people have got a challenge to say there is actually no institutions. The legal concepts and frameworks as well as access to information if I'm faced with legal issues in cross-border, we won't be able to operate. So there's a majority of people who are saying, yes, there is a need to have this particular activity to be done. And I believe that from leveraging on existing relationships and agreements, comes at the least, you are adopting concepts of trust and relationships. So, which is very key in actually catapulting this particular initiative to move into the next level, because you already have that as a base. And I think one of my colleagues also mentioned a very important point of how do you actually get to have everybody to collaborate, especially in the legal sense of the word, without stepping on the sovereignty thereof of the country. How do you do that? And I think we're already in a way, it's not in the digital space, but this type of mechanisms and institutions and this block and regional organizations like SADC, they are actually a good place to start, just from a perspective of us to move into the next stage. And I also must applaud internet and jurisdiction to actually espouse the principle of inclusivity in it going to the policy development, this policy development process, in that it actually is going to tap into a vast network of organizations and individuals that are there. AFICTA as it is, we are rightly positioned in that we are existing in all the regions that are in Africa. About 33 countries are already represented, and our perspective is that we will actually make sure that you access that constituency, and in making sure that you reach your principle of inclusivity, which is lying at the core of our beliefs as an organization. I thank you for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thabo. Again, your points are greatly appreciated. And again, to pick a few items, the question of inclusivity is in the DNA of this project. So we really try to dock onto as many existing organizations and initiatives that are there to really connect the dots and to make sure that this is not adding to the proliferation of initiatives and unintended consequences of uncoordinated action, but really try to build on this vast amount of knowledge that is already out there. And I think one of the key items that you also refer to is the question of common principles. And to extend it a bit, as one of the key experiences that we had from the previous status reports, the question of common terminology and almost a translation role, not only across languages to make sure it really is inclusive, but also across different kind of approaches to the problem from a legal, from a technical, and from a political point of view. And this is something that we believe that if we initiate this bottom-up initiative with all of the relevant information that can hopefully be shared over the course of the project, that this will help this also intra-regional, interregional cooperation, because these common principles and norms and also the terminology linked to it is really key. So thank you so much for the points that you made. And then without further ado, I would now move on to our next esteemed speaker, who is Tapiwa Rona-Chirka, who is joining us from the African Union Commission. Tapiwa is the Trade Policy Officer at the organization, and he will also have a unique perspective to share with us from the African Continental Free Trade Area perspective. It's not AFICTA, it's almost the same abbreviation, so we should not mistake the two. And Tapiwa, I would be also very much interested in understanding from you the perspective in regards to the trade question, but also the interlinkages between digital policy, regional integration, and development in Africa. So Tapiwa, in this case, you have the floor, and we'll be very interested to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much, Martin. thank you very much to the organizers for this. I think the project is already, addressing one of the challenges which we have in Africa. That is what a former colleague of mine would want to call digital fog that we have amongst policymakers, where there is that lack of knowledge in as far as the digital economy or policies within the digital economy is concerned. So I'm happy that the project is trying to address that through, one of the phases, which has to do with knowledge sharing, which is very imperative, if I can mention. So I think from a development perspective, which can be ushered in by the African Continental Free Trade Area, I would like to say that, if we are to take a step back, possibly into 2020 and see the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and on trade as well as on economics, we'll see that, there was quite a huge impact, and there was that light bulb moment that, we can actually achieve more by leveraging the digital economy and trying to experience gains or build back better, like what everyone is saying, through digital trade, because digital trade is going to be a critical part of the African Continental Free Trade Area by virtue of having to reduce the transaction costs as much as trade is concerned. So if we are to look at the digital policies that we have or digital policies that we may want to have, we'll realize that if we are to institute restrictive policies, at the end of the day, we won't be restricting digital trade and we won't be restricting intra-Africa trade. And as I mentioned, that digital trade is going to be an important part of African Continental Free Trade Area. So it is important for the African countries to really think about it, to say what kind of policies do we want, and really have that objective in mind, that we still have that objective of achieving the Africa Economic Community at the end of the day, and regional integration and development in Africa. So if they have that knowledge that the project is going to try to build or build upon other initiatives that we have, like what has been mentioned by my Smart Africa colleague, if they have that knowledge, they will be able to put into place the right digital policies which will promote digital trade in Africa, and at the end of the day, promote regional integration and development. And if I'm to take what the previous speaker mentioned, that we can make use of regional economic communities as building blocks, just the same way as we did when we were trying to put into place the African Continental Free Trade Area. The regional economic communities are the building blocks of an integrated Africa. So if we are to have digital policies, or rather if we are to have interoperable digital policies at regional level, SADC, EAC, etc., you'll notice that it will be easier at continental level to have interoperable digital policies that will foster or create an environment where digital trade will actually thrive, or rather will actually be the main actor in as far as the African Continental Free Trade Area is concerned. So we know that the AfCFTA is there to accelerate regional integration in Africa. So by accelerating regional integration, it will accelerate development in Africa. And if we are going to have digital policies which will also improve regional value chains in Africa, it means that you're going to have possibly the SMEs having to participate more in some of these regional value chains and to participate more in the digital economy. So I think that's what I can say in as far as regional integration and development in Africa, and also the African Continental Free Trade Area is concerned. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Tapiwa. And before picking out a few items, I would like to press you on another topic. I think that also is worth mentioning, where your perspective is a pretty unique one. It's the question of data governance, and also what prevailing challenges you, and also from a trade community perspective, you see prevailing challenges that really do need to be tackled, which will certainly be one of the points that we'll try to really, emphasize as well. So without putting you on the spot, would you also have some thoughts in this regard that you would like to share?
Thank you, Martin, for that. I think, a number of challenges have been mentioned in as far as the trade digital policies have been mentioned. You can talk of consumer protection, you can talk of interoperability, and you can talk of sovereignty of member states. That is, when it comes to data governance, it can be translated into data localization, so to speak. So some of these challenges, which I can add, institutional capacities. A colleague, someone mentioned that, we may have all of these policies, but we don't have those institutions which will, make sure that these policies are implemented. So there is institutional capacity. There is also policy and regulatory making skills, which is, if I'm to be honest, inadequate in Africa's perspective. So that challenge, which is compounded also by the fact that as Africa, some of us or some of the countries may not really know what policies to put in place in favor of their interests. Because if we were to look from a global perspective, we realize that some of the digital policies that are there, if we can go to, or data governance policies, if we are in Europe, we're talking about the GDPR, America, or even in Asia, these policies are anchored on the interests of the country, or rather of the region. For example, in Europe, we know that the GDPR favors the fundamental human rights. Data is a fundamental human right. So it is anchored on data as a fundamental human right. And if you were to go to the Americas, we realize that, there is somewhat of a free market perspective when it comes to data governance, and and it favors also the data intense digital companies. And if we're to go, for example, in China, we realize that data governance is a national security thing. So in Africa, we need to actually see what are our interests at the end of the day. Is it development? Is it economic development at the end of the day? So by being able to identify what are our interests in as far as digital economy is concerned, then it will be easier for us to, take a step back and being able to put all these policies in place which favor our interests at the end of the day. But the most important thing is to be able to have that knowledge, which the project will try to build on, have that knowledge on policy making, have that knowledge on data governance, so as for you to make relevant policymakers, so that you don't over-regulate and you don't under-regulate. And at the end of the day, you have relevant and good policies or data governance policies. Thank you, Martin.
Yes, thank you for the additional points. And it also goes back to a notion that we've come across with the previous investigations of also very clear differences in norms and normative understanding of the values attached to some of this digital transformation, going from the question of the right to be forgotten that is anchored in the GDPR in Europe, but at the same time, the right to be remembered is something that's pretty pronounced in Latin America. And key also cultural perceptions and perspectives from an African point of view will play a role there as well. So certainly, the more voices I think we can mobilize to get this mosaic of perception that then those technical and legal solutions can be built upon will be the most conducive, we believe, to the overall success of the exercise. Thank you so much. So given that we are going well with time, which is wonderful, I'm going now to the next speaker. The next speaker is joining us from the GSMA and is Public Policy Director. And Kamota Power, I would basically ask you the same questions as the previous speakers. But here, what of course is very much interesting for us is the perspective of the GSMA, also given the unbelievable leapfrogging that African stakeholders, practitioners, and the population actually is doing in the use of mobile, not only technology, but mobile services, mobile financial services. So very interested to hear your perspective on the question of cross-border digital policies in that context. And yeah, very happy to have you with us today as well. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us, and thank you very much to the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network for inviting us to this very, very important conversation. I think that these sorts of conversations are actually very, very critical and key to helping us bridge this divide, I suppose, in policy gaps across the region. But even before then, I think there's a need as well for us, from a policy-making perspective, to take a step back in terms of how we are pushing connectivity to be made available to citizens of the region. We need to take a step back and review our policies and reassess where exactly our policy efforts need to lie. Currently and historically, most of the policy efforts that we've had in place have been directed at ensuring that infrastructure is rolled out so that connectivity itself can be provided. I think at this point, it's very important for us to take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and assess really whether that is where we should be putting most of our focus on. Right now, we have a connectivity gap of less than 10% across the entire region from the last less than 20% from across the entire region from the last review that we did at the GSMA through the mobile internet connectivity report. We just have about 19% of a coverage gap. This has been shrinking very rapidly over the last 5-6 years. It was 51% back in 2014. But whilst that coverage gap itself has been shrinking, what we've seen is that there's been a very rapid expansion of the usage gap itself. So the connectivity is being provided, but people are actually not getting connected. So we have 53% of the population still remaining unconnected, despite the fact that they are within coverage that is being provided by mobile broadband networks. So I think that it's very important, first of all, for us to reassess where our policy efforts are and focus on the fact that this usage gap needs to be bridged. And with that in place in the first instance, then we can begin to talk about other digital related policies across borders. I think many of the previous speakers mentioned issues related to data protection and data privacy and security, and I'll emphasize that as well. Providing the connectivity is one thing, but providing a safe space for people to connect is another thing entirely as well. It's one of the areas that you find great concern in across the region. And I think it was in Smart Africa's feedback that it was mentioned that even despite the fact that we have about 32 countries across the region having some sort of data protection legislation, 9 still remain without any implementation sort of agency. But even that aside, there is still need for us to make effort in harmonizing those data protection legislations that we have in place, such that we create the levels of trust across the region to the extent that countries trust the legislation in place in their neighbors, and they are able to facilitate cross-border data flows. So we very much need for policymakers to embrace similar privacy approaches, ensure that they develop data protection frameworks which are lawful and fair, and ensure that the personal data of citizens is lawfully processed. They need to ensure that the data protection legislation that they have is purposeful, and it limits the processing of personal data to only specific kind of purposes. they must ensure that the data protection frameworks that they have in place are proportionate, and they ensure the processing of personal data is not done to excessive levels. It's only done to specific purposes. They need to ensure that the data that is being collected as well is high quality and it's very accurate. They need to ensure that there's openness in terms of the data processors and ensuring transparency in how the data processors carry on with their activities. They need to provide great levels of accountability so that they ensure that data processors are accountable for all of their activities. I think these are sort of the basic principles upon which we need to see data protection legislation being produced such that it will, first of all, give confidence to consumers, and this will also help in greater adoption of the connectivity. You will see a lot more applications being developed. People will have greater trust in the connectivity that is being provided and in the applications that are being developed. And with that in mind as well, you'll find that governments themselves now have greater trust in the fact that neighboring countries, sister countries, have similar legislation with them, and this will greatly facilitate cross-border data flows. And for me, this is something that is going to be very, very critical to the success as well of the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement as well. That, I think, for me, is one of the most important things that has happened to the region recently. And in saying that as well, there needs to be great effort in ensuring that that trade agreement succeeds. And with that in mind, we need to obviously apply a lot of effort towards ensuring that many of our digital policies across the region are harmonized. Many of our regulatory practices are harmonized. There are a number of platforms where these sorts of conversations happen. From a data protection perspective, for instance, the Malabo Convention is there, it exists. Smart Africa is doing quite a lot of work on ensuring data protection initiatives are put in place to help to drive the adoption of similar data protection practices across the region. There's the Africa Data Leadership Initiative, African Network of Data Protection Authorities. There are many different avenues where these sorts of data protection conversations, for instance, are being had. And I'm speaking specifically to data protection here, and there are similar conversations being had on similar digital related topics as well in many different avenues. So we need more of these conversations to happen, but then they should happen with the objective of also harmonizing the conversation. And that's where we in the know need to also be able to participate actively in many of these conversations and help to drive these conversations towards similar outcomes, so that when we are communicating these sorts of outcomes to our African brothers and sisters, it's all the same messaging. And this is what is going to help basically drive the harmonization of policy and regulatory practices across the region. So it's very important for these sorts of initiatives. And I like the fact as well, and I must comment again as well, that the policy network is taking this action and also organizing events like this. And more of these basically need to happen with similar type of stakeholders as well, because all of us are having basically these sorts of conversations in other places as well, and we need to continue having them, so that we need to continue to communicate the same things and ensure that we're arriving at a harmonized policy and regulatory perspective for our region.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kamal, for really painting the landscape and for giving the examples of really the ongoing dialogues and debates that are taking place in the privacy realm and across the whole continent, again, that are already very well informed. And that the key things that I pick out from also your intervention, that when we look at the legal or technical approaches to solutions in regards to those policies that will enable all of these benefits that digital technology can provide the continent, that the question of proportionality is very relevant, the due process from a legal point of view, and also the question of openness and transparency, which again all go back to the very beginning. And I think it's a connective kind of theme throughout all of the interventions up until that point, the question of how can we generate trust across these different dialogues and make sure that indeed there is an ongoing harmonized kind of dialogue going on across those silos. And again, to underline, today very consciously was called a kickoff event for a process that will take 2 years. So this is not an event and we deactivate the Zoom call today and we all go our places. Now, there is a form that we warmly encourage everybody to fill out. because this will then ensure that we can have ongoing engagement, intersessional exchanges. There will be other events to come. There will be data collection. There will be very concrete workshops that we refer to again in greater detail, because there will be the option to express interest to participate. And this hopefully will serve exactly this purpose, even though it might just be one of many activities needed for that purpose, but that really is something that we are trying to accomplish here together. So thank you for those points. And looking at the time, I think that last but not least, it is now really a great pleasure to also invite Ms. Allison Gilbert to take the virtual floor. Many of you might know her. She's the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa. And also for this particular project, she will be leading the authoring team for the status report that we'll try to develop jointly. And my question to Allison would be slightly different, because of course, Allison, I can also ask concerning the key areas that you might have in mind that are very relevant for the exercise that we have here. But you've heard now the interventions from all of our esteemed speakers, the different perspectives that are there. And I would be very interested in your takeaway, also in regards to then our next steps of trying to synthesize this and how to emphasize some of these themes already moving forward. So Allison, it's a great pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Martin, and please do wave your hand at me or something if I go on. I've sort of lost track of where the time is. It's really wonderful to have particularly the people on this panel and the previous panel here today as we kick off this, I think, very timely collaboration, mainly because of many of the issues and events that people have spoken about from their different organizational perspectives, but particularly from the African Union Commission, where I think, together with the digital transformation strategy and hopefully shortly the adoption and support of the data policy framework and the interoperable ID frameworks for Africa. These are, very high-level principle documents that require, evidence, knowledge, experience in order to be implemented successfully, domesticated at the national level, and of course through the important regional economic communities that were mentioned by both Thabo and Kamal, I think. As I said, I think it's absolutely timely that we do this. I did just, I think a lot of the points have been made very well by a number of the other speakers. And perhaps just to emphasize, I don't think it can be said enough, everybody has spoken about it, but the importance of redressing digital inequality and in fact kind of emerging data injustice that one's seeing within countries, but also between countries, as seeing as we are concerned with the cross-border issues, and really taking the opportunity of of regional collaboration and of global collaboration to really redress the unequal and uneven distribution of opportunities and harms that go with these enormously exciting digital developments, these processes of digitalization and datification. And so I think it's really important that we understand the different challenges that arise for us in terms of cross-border and cross-jurisdictional kinds of issues, while we've got enormous challenges at the national level, and as I said, the domestication of some of the frameworks and some of the opportunities, creating the enabling frameworks at the domestic level. There are also, these are essentially data, internet, cybersecurity. These are effectively global digital public goods. And so the global dimension, the global collaboration of these to ensure that they are realized at the national level is the kind of critical underpinning of this. Basically, if we're talking about cybersecurity, the weakest link is the country that has the least developed cybersecurity regime. The weakest link from a data protection point of view with global cross flows of data are countries that have been mentioned, without these frameworks. So, so just in terms of the kind of broad areas from a cross-border kind of concerns that we would have, I mean, I think, particularly with COVID, which has really, highlighted the inequalities that we see, the kind of structural inequalities that are reflected in that, but actually the lack of opportunities for digital substitution have also highlighted, has compounded those inequalities. So people who are already kind of, unevenly represented. And as I said, unless we address these issues, this is essentially a kind of elite conversation. Those who have access, those who have the opportunities will be able to make the most of them. But until we've addressed, the issues that Kamal and others were speaking about, on the demand side, and Annika on the demand side around those skills, we simply won't be able to address these opportunities. So broad areas of cross-border policy and jurisdiction that probably concern us. As I said, with COVID, one of the other things besides the lack of digital substitution is actually the widespread use of spread of fake news, of misinformation, particularly around COVID, really undermined national efforts for vaccinations and these kinds of things. This is really kind of, low internet usage, but people are sharing this, across WhatsApp and across basic social networking services. And of course, then the other issues, people have been speaking about the enabling environment. Obviously here we have already spoken about the importance of the digital infrastructure, the data infrastructure. We need the institutional arrangements that we need in place to enforce these and enable. I think that's a very important part. Is that a lot with the data protection, these kind of things, we focus on the enforcement and that sort of things. These are obviously very important, but creating this enabling environment for innovation, for data-driven value, these sorts of things are equally important, and equally important require agile, coordinated, public policies, public strategies to coordinate private sector activity in order to, create these opportunities, these harmonized opportunities on the continent.
Oh, yes,
So we just need, I think there's a little bit of interference, but I'll just speak over it unless somebody's asking me to stop. So I think there are a few things that we've got there. So the fake news is very, very important. And I think this was even before COVID that we see the issues around Cambridge Analytica, where, electoral systems, were undermined by cross-border activity. And we've got, issues with some of the big players, geopolitics going on around, hacking of systems and things. So the fake news side of it is very important, how we coordinate that, the disorder and disinformation, that is really being compounded by COVID, things we have to address. And then, of course, we do have the issues of security. Security and data protection, as they've been kind of presented in our jurisdiction, and the Malabo Convention was actually quite clever on attaching those two sides of the coin very nicely. But these are the Malabo Convention 2014 now, 8 years on, and we still don't have the threshold 15 countries that have adopted it. And this has been cited by member states for the African Union when the African Union is trying to develop other policies by saying, oh, well, we haven't got that kind of, how can we proceed with this when we don't have that accepted? So absolutely creating the evidence, the information, the common purpose around policy with a proper evidence base. Because we speak about data in the sense of data for economic purposes and for financial purposes, but actually we're really missing a lot of the data in order to inform evidence-based policy that is appropriate to Africa, that is appropriate to our institutional capacities and our human development, etc. So having a lot of these people here today and able to extend their networks and provide that information that we often can't get at a national statistical level to support our understanding of what needs to be done here as we try and implement these continental strategies in order to, as I said, create a better distribution of opportunities, create opportunities for ourselves here, but also to align ourselves with developments elsewhere. So I think, if we think about the issues around fake news, for example, and cross-border issues, there are obviously issues, a whole series of human rights issues there. There are human rights issues around freedom of expression, and also the use of legal, anti-misinformation legislation, irregularly, illegitimately, in order to curtail people's rights of expression.
So to summarize, given that also, we will then enter into the kind of final kind of closing of the session. Allison, thank you so much for the points that you've made, and I assume you agree that this is really a call for an inclusive contribution and for as much participation of the course of the project as we can, so that it can enable us to provide, the knowledge necessary for well-informed decision-making at the end of the day, which very much, is one of the key objectives. And the second one, and you refer to it as well, and I think we all agree, there is a global dialogue ongoing already, a global debate, and the African perspectives are not taken into consideration as much as they should be. There really is a gap. And we also extremely underline the opportunity here of connecting all of the ongoing initiatives to help amplify and to use also this catalyst that COVID, provided in a positive and negative sense, of course, as well. That now is the moment, I think, to really make a very visible kind of push that there are very particular norms and also realities to be taken into consideration when global norms are being put into place. So Allison, thank you so much. We are extremely privileged to have you on board with us and to engage also over the course of the next activities with us and with our partners. And with this, I would like to close also then this part of our event today. And given that we have 1 minute left, I do think that it is the moment to now hand over to Tracy directly, and also to make sure that she again underlines all of the relevant now action points on where you can engage, where you can take part in those activities, because inclusiveness is not just a hype word, we really mean it. And we would like to keep in touch with you now over the course of the coming months and also the next 3 years to ensure that all these perspectives are taken into consideration. So Tracy, please wrap up our session.
Yes, thank you. This brings us to the end of our day and of the event today. And just as a reminder, there is the engagement survey that has been shared with you in the chat box and will also be shared with you via email. We acknowledge the wonderful interactions that have taken place in the chat box as well. And we invite you all and encourage you to please share those comments in the engagement forum. If I was to wrap everything up in a bow and give this event today three words, I'd use 3 C's, and that's communication, collaboration, and connection. I really would like to thank all of you today, thank all of our speakers for the kickoff event, and we hope to see you all very soon. Thank you very much.